Okay, our next podcast is going to go into various molecules of the cell, or the molecular diversity of life, as the title is here. Um, so, in this podcast, we're going to be talking about the diversity of molecules that are important for living things. We just completed our podcast on water, the water molecule, and that's an important molecule. But another very important molecule is those that include carbon. Carbon can form very large, complex, and diverse molecules. And so we're going to be looking at that, and the study of that molecule um, is referred to as organic chemistry. So there's a whole field of chemistry that's devoted to just the study of these very large molecules that include carbon. Now, carbon can form bonds with many other molecules and can form bonds with itself because it has 4 valence electrons and can therefore form 4 covalent bonds to fill the valence shell. And so this makes it a very um, malleable atom in that it can um, form bonds with a lot of other different um, atoms. Here's some examples. So carbon in its valence has 4. So here's showing an example of 4 bonds that add to carbon, and those are just hydrogens. And so that's methane, CH4. So this is the molecular formula that we'll be using primarily. This is the structural formula showing a dash for the bonds. We went over this in an earlier podcast, but so here's also carbon forming a bond with itself. And so these are called chains or backbones, and they can be very long, these carbon backbones or chains. So this one just has 2 formed by a single bond. Here's a double bond holding these carbons together. So that's just showing you a few examples of carbon. Um, so carbon can form, I mentioned backbones or skeletons or chains. They're referred to as are these links of carbons that hook to each other, and then other things attached to it, giving it various properties. So there's just a single chain up here of carbons, some with single bonds and double bonds, or 2 dashes there. Here's one that branches, so it can come off and branch and not be a straight line. And it can come back and hook to itself, and these are called rings when the backbone comes around and hooks to itself. So a number of our carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, form these single rings. Um, we can also have groups of atoms that can attach to these backbones, and these are referred to as functional groups, and um, they're usually involved in the chemical reactions that these molecules are involved in, and they also give the molecule distinct characteristics like solubility, reactivity, um, and other characteristics are associated with these functional groups. Um, Here's a list of the functional groups. There's 6 listed here in our outline. There's 7 listed here. We list 6. We don't list the methyl group. We just list the first 6 there. But in our outline there, we list the each of these functional groups, and then what they occur in, and what they're made up of. And we can see this in this chart. very easily. So we list the first three here: hydroxyl, carbonyl, and carboxyl. In this, we show the structure here. So hydroxyl group is OH and single bond. And so when this hooks to a carbon backbone, such as our example right here of ethanol, we have two carbons in our backbone, we have some hydrogens around it, and there is our hydroxyl group, the OH attached to these carbons. So when this occurs in alcohols, and it gives some unique functional properties to the molecule. All right, the next one in our outline there is the carbonyl group, and here it shows it highlighted here. One carbon, an oxygen double bonded to the carbon. Here we see it in the carbon backbone here. So there's our carbonyl group. And we see this in acetones and ketones and aldehyde. Acetone is an example of one of those. Next group is carboxyl group. Here we have actually kind of like combining both of these together to form the carbonyl group. Here's our hydroxyl group right there. Carbon double bonded to an oxygen. Here we see our carbonyl group in this example here of a acetic acid. So that's the first three of the functional groups there, and here is the other three. And your book again also mentions this methyl group. The amino group includes nitrogen, so we see that here. And then our sulfhydryl group, it's going to have sulfur in it. And our phosphate group here has a phosphate in it. So the phosphate has a phosphate double bonded to an oxygen and also single bonded to three other oxygens, and then attached to the carbon backbone, as in this example of glycerol phosphate. So these are the functional groups that will attach to a carbon backbone, and then when it does, it gives these unique properties to the molecules. And so in this, it shows you those properties, examples of those compounds. Now, our next lecture is going to go into these specific types of molecules. And they refer to these large molecules that will have sometimes these functional groups attached to them that play very important roles in living things, and they're called biological molecules or macromolecules. There's 4 different types of these, and so that's what we'll be going into next.